Today I'd like to talk about safety. What is safety? Safety goes beyond the tools that we use. Safety is the way we think. It's a state of mind, in many cases, whereby people are aware of possibilities of injuries at all time. And we have ways of preventing this. And I'd like to share with you a very simple formula. We're going to call it S-U-P-A, SUPA. Remember this, SUPA. You may have a smile, but it works, it'll work for you. S, it means to see, to look. The U is to understand the situation you've got to work with. Your P is to plan your work. And A, finally, is to act and perform your work in a very safe manner. Whatever you do on your trap line, on your four-wheeler, driving, walking through the ice, remember the simple formula of SUPA, and it will prevent many accidents and injuries through your life as a trapper.
So in this section concerning trap safety, we will be seeing how to proceed with a safe trap opening and using different tools, which will help the trapper to work in a more secure way and avoid in there some accidents. So first of all, we're going to use a killing trap, bigger size than one we call the 330. And the first step to do is to bring out towards you the first spring. Put your foot on it, stabilize the spring, and we're going to use the safety pliers. You got it in different models, so what you do, apply the pliers on the outside of the spring, compress. In this plier, what's interesting is we have a self-blocking tool, so both hands get free to work afterwards. So the next thing to do is to hook up the safety hook, release the pliers, and proceed the same way with the other spring. Now, step 2. Trapper has to open the trap. Now there's different ways to proceed. Now some trappers will try to bring out the jaws together with their hands or fingers. Now in the cases where you got ice, snow, wet gloves, or like me, small hands, it could be dangerous, because if you are to bring the jaws together and then the jaws separate, you can get caught in the trap. So one good way to proceed is put the trap flat on the ground, one hand on each side, and apply a pressure down on the jaws. Okay, here is one of the very most important thing. You can't let go the trap, because that's now when it is dangerous. Now as you can see, I'm not holding the trap toward the center of the jaws. I mainly use my inner part of my hand and apply pressure on the corners, on the side of the trap. This is more easy to hold the trap, and by the way, it clears out the center where you're gonna have to work later on the trigger and the dog. Now, always ensure that your safety hook are still on the springs. Now we talk about safety. So now there are tools available in the market that we call safety grippers. One way to proceed, and it has to be an habit, put it from the top, release it from the top. That's the way to work safely with safety grippers. Now after I've put on my safety gripper, I can slowly release the trap or the jaws. Okay? Step 3. If I have to make an adjustment to my trigger, it's time to do it. There's no danger here. I got a safety gripper, safety hooks, so everything's secure now. So sometimes you'll have to bend or unbend the trigger, and then it's time to put the dog on the trigger. So there again, I will apply a little bit of pressure. Choose one of the teeth, if ever there's more than one, and put the dog over the trigger. Now in this case, I have a bad trigger orientation. So for me, it's not good. So I'm going to release the dog slowly. Bring out the trigger because I know it wasn't right. Do the same. Now I have a favorable trigger position. Some trappers have a tendency to release the trigger of the dog right away. You shouldn't do that. Actually, the secure way to work with killing traps is to hold the dog, apply pressure down on the trigger and the dog, and then you can release your hand. This way you cannot get caught in the jaws. The other way to proceed is to hold the trap steady. Always hold the trap so it won't fall. If it becomes to fall, you can have the tendency to put your hand in it to hold it. That's where it's dangerous again. So you hold the trap steady, and depending on the trapping technique you will do, either you remove the safety gripper first or the safety hooks. That will depend on the trapping technique. But normally I should proceed by removing my safety gripper first because I still have those safety hooks on. Take it apart, removing my safety hooks, and now the trap is set. One important thing, and you should always consider this, what the part which is dangerous for you is it is inside the jaws and nearby the springs here. That's where you have to avoid moving, putting your fingers, your hands, if you don't need to. Now that the trap is set, you want to undo the trap. You want to close the trap. So if you are to practice or just closing your trapping season or just closing a trap in the bush, what you should do is not to put a piece of wood inside the jaws because it will be caught in there. What you ought to do to close a trap is take a piece of wood, put it in between the upper part of the jaws, and then just hit the trigger. This way, it will be much more secure for you. The hands are not being close to the trap or the jaws, and you will avoid any problems like this. For this demonstration, we're going to use, there again, killing type trap, size 280. And we will be using a safety rope. Now, this becomes a very useful safety tool because it's small, it's light, and you can carry it in a pocket, in your backpack, or ideally always with you. Some trappers will put it around their waist, so when they go on a trap line, they always have a rope, what we call the safety rope, with them. The use of the safety rope is very, very easy. First of all, you make a slide knot. Insert it inside your foot, around your foot. Put the trap on top. Bend the spring, and starting from the bottom, you put the rope inside both springs twice. Once it is done, stabilize the trap with your other foot, roll the rope around your hand, and pull. When it is high enough, you just have to put the safety hook in place. Proceed the same way with the other spring, starting from the bottom. Going twice. That's it. So from there, your trap is ready to open, as we saw before, using the same method. Here we're going to see, there again, a safe trap opening using what we call the J-hook. So it's a small tool. Some trappers do it themselves. It's small, it's light, you can carry it in the bush. Some trappers will carry it at their waist. And it's easy to use to open trap. Now if you are to use the bigger traps, you may have a hook which is longer. That does not matter. One trick to start, the trap has to be standing up. Always think that your safety hook should be on top of the spring. It's going to be easier afterwards to set it in place. So there again, stabilize the trap by putting your foot inside the trap. Move the spring a little sideways and insert the G-hook inside the spring. Pull up and put the hook in place. You should ensure that if there's a chain on the trap, it shouldn't be in your way. So we proceed the same. Put the G-hook inside spring. Lift it up and put the hook in place. From there, the trap is ready to be opened. Now we're going to see opening of a small traps, namely the one, the size is called the 120. Now there again, you have a various different models that exist on the market. And trapper used to open them with their hands, let's say the previous models that were existing before. But now, if you want to respect the trap standards, manufacturers have made traps which are more stronger and I would say much harder to open. So for instance, a Magnum trap, see the springs there are very hard to open with the hands and can cause injuries to the trapper. So there again, it's a good habit to use the safety tools. Gonna use here a small pliers. Put it around the spring, compress. There again, put my hook in place. Now, always remember when you open a trap, a killing trap type, you should always do it on a flat surface. You should avoid slopes, or even in the snow. It's not always easy. And in the case of the small traps, one good habit to do is to open it on your knee, which makes it flat, instead of opening it in your hands like this and holding it. So what you can do at this stage, open the trap. Now, in the meantime, I'd like you to observe that we have here a 2-jaw Magnum trap. Now be careful that the dog does not slip inside the jaws as you want to open it, because you can't take it out. So it's a good habit to ensure that the dog is outside these jaws when you got double jaws, and then you can compress. Now, same thing for the trigger. It has to be inside the jaws in order to open it properly. Make a compression, put the dog over the trigger, and then again, that's where it is dangerous for the trappers. Don't let go the trap. Put it flat on a steady surface, hold the dog, put the pressure down, and then you can release your hand. Many accidents happens that way with the small traps, because the trapper thinks it's the dog's properly set, and it's not. So you hold the dog down, release the hand, hold the spring, and then you can release the other hand. It's very simple. It's only a matter of a habit to do this, and as you do it on your trap line, it becomes just natural. But always remember, these things are dangerous for the trappers. On the Belil killing traps model, there's a particular thing that what we call the safety hook, but it is very interesting because in these models, the particularity is that when the trap is set, the hooks remain in place. So it adds up to the trapper's safety when he is to manipulate the traps. Now, in order to set the trap properly, trapper has voluntarily have to remove the hooks from the springs. In this case, then the trap is ready to be to work. Otherwise, the hooks remains on the springs and prevents the trap from closing. So that's what happens when the safety hooks are on and you want to spring the trap. Actually, the jaws do not close tight one over the other. Now there again, according to safety, a trapper can make a very easy modification to all his killing traps in order to keep the hook on place. So when he sets the spring, put the safety hook on, you just add up a small piece of wire that goes around the hook and then pulls it back. In this way, the hook won't fall down. It will just stay at the proper place until you're ready to set the trap finally. In this demonstration, we're going to be using a long spring number 4 restraining trap. Now, one particular thing that you have to consider as this trap is going to be used for submersion system. In other words, it's going to be used for semi-aquatic species, namely because of the size, namely beaver and otter, more particularly on a beaver dam. So you cannot use this system now on land for land animals like canids and lynx. So the way to proceed, the best there again is to put it on a flat surface, which would be your knee. Applying the base of the trap on your knee, ensure that the dog's already outside trap, and there again you're going to be using the inner part of your hands. Don't try to run your fingers over the springs. It only has to go on top. You have to get your thumbs close to the jaws. So what you are to do is apply equal pressure on each side and bend the springs. The springs have to come lower than the base of the trap, otherwise the jaws won't open. If the springs are bent much lower, the jaws will open by themselves. Hold the springs together with one hand. Now you have to apply sufficient pressure, otherwise the jaws will close and catch your fingers. There again, we proceed the same way with all restraining systems. You put the dog in place with your thumb, regarding the other hand, put sufficient pressure to hold it in place, stabilize the trap, release the other hand, and going underneath, of course, of the other jaw and the pan, lift the pan in place with the dog. Now be careful with these traps because the pan has a tendency to bend very easily. So you ought to keep a pressure up on the trigger before you release your hand and bring back the jaw in place. Now, one other particular aspect of the long springs, as you can see, the trap is not level. So the way to proceed is that the springs, either the small traps or the big ones, the springs have to come toward the dog and not the opposite way. Otherwise, it will have the one jaw to lift too high. So one principle with these traps, trapper has to bend the springs always toward the dog side. And then we can proceed with the trigger adjustment. So push out the dog further than you can, and then by pinching the pan with your fingers, slightly bend it down gently, put the jaw in place, and you have a perfect level trap ready to be used. Here we'll be looking after the opening, namely again safe opening of restraining traps. The one we use here is the coil padded jaw number 3, which corresponds to the size of the trap. We have smaller size like the 1.5. Now the way to proceed is that you will put the trap and the springs toward like this. Put your hands together as if you would be making a prayer, and by using the inner sides of your hands, you are to put them around springs, the coils. Push down, that relieves your fingers, your thumbs, and then you are to hold the trap, both jaws, with only one hand. The dog should be out in order to be able to pass it over the jaw. By applying a pressure, adequate pressure with your thumb, you press down the dog, releasing the other hand, going underneath the trap, lifting the pallet or the trigger, and then you can release the dog. Now, a final adjustment, you push out the dog more you can, and you adjust the pallet to have it leveled. To proceed with this, you're using your 2 fingers pressing the trigger, and the other fingers using the base to stabilize the other fingers. And then you press down and ensuring that the trap is at a perfect horizontal level. The other reason is that it brings the dog to be more sensitive and have a faster closing when the animal gets his paw into this trap. Remember, you always have to work from underneath the pan, never from inside the jaws. If you want to untrigger the trap, lift the jaw, touch the pan, and that's it.
This is the Belil foot snare. I'm going to show you how to set it. First of all, move the pan out of the way and bring up the setting dog. This clamps between the jaws while you bring up the springs. The springs always face the dog. Put one spring into place, bring the other spring around. Easier if you turn it upside down. Bring it into place. Now you're ready to pull back the jaws and bring up the safety. Once you have the safety up, the frame is more or less set, but don't forget to bring the setting dog back underneath the pan. At this point, you're ready to place the frame into position and put on the snare, the foot snare itself. The foot snare goes between the front jaws, under the back jaw, under the setting spring and the dog. We tighten it up, we bring over the dog and put it under the pan. At this point, the trap is set, except that the safety is still on. The very last thing we do before we leave the set is bring the safety out of the way.
Trap maintenance is made up of a couple of sections. The first is dealing with the trap repairs. The second will be dealing with the treatment of your traps for next season. Over the course of the season, you are going to run into some problems with your traps. You're going to have some parts missing, some parts will break, and it's important that we replace these things. For example, we have a 330 here that has a couple of problems with it. It has a trigger that needs to be replaced, and it also has a spring that's broken. These are the things you're going to have to be able to put back on, bearing in mind you have to save your safeties from the previous thing if they're still there, because you're going to need them next time around. You may have a trigger that's broken, and you have to replace the trigger on your traps. A single trigger will work briefly, but it's better to have a double trigger. Get it even or get it brand new if you can. A dog may be missing on your trap, or it may have been bent badly when you've had an animal in the trap. Those have to be either corrected or replaced. And then you have some, of course, that have just been out in the woods a little too long, and they're going to have to be treated after the repair has been made to them. One thing to remember is that when you finish the season and you're about to do your trap maintenance, you need to release the springs on your trap so that you don't fatigue them. If they're left set all winter, or all summer, excuse me, they're going to cause some problems. Release the traps. This section is going to deal with trap maintenance. We've already talked about the repairs that need to be made from last year's. Now we've got to maintain these. Traps that you've had from the past have already been treated. They've been degreased, so they're not a problem. You don't have to worry about them for this stage. But for the new traps that you've acquired, they all come with an oily film that's put on it by the producer to keep them from rusting before they've been sold. So we have to make sure we get that off. There's a number of products on the market that help you remove these greases and oil films that are on those traps. You see some of them here. You may have some of these of your own that are favorites that remove grease. Just remember that when we finish with the removal of the grease, that we have to rinse the traps off to make sure that there's no residues left, and the residues that you have left over from the degreasing process you have to deal with in an environmentally acceptable manner. Remember, you have to treat your snares in the same way that you've treated your new traps, and they can be treated in exactly the same way using the same products. Now that we've got our traps degreased or repaired, the second step that we go through is the trap dyeing. Now, the trap dyeing has to be done for all traps that have been used before. You can see here we have a trap that's desperately in need of some dyeing. The dyeing can be done in different colors, and it can be done 2 different ways as well. You can see here that we have a black dye, and here we have a brown dye. This is what we want our finished products to look like. The 2 options we have are to go with the log crystals, which is a powder, and it comes in black or brown, which can be added to hot water. We dip our traps in that, or alternatively, we can use products like Speed Dip, which come in 3 colors, black, brown, or white. And these avoid the water process, but they serve to do the same thing. All right, now that you've made your choice of treatment, you then just get on with doing it. In this case, we're going to start with the logwood crystals, and we need a container to put them in. We need a source of heat. And as you can see here, we have, in this instance, a propane burner below a steel tank filled with water that's just about boiling here. The process that we're going to use here is just dropping some of this logwood crystal into the warm hot water, the boiling water. We're going to put it in, and then we're going to stir it. We have to make sure there's a good mix of this stuff before we actually put our traps into it. We got it in there. Now we're going to mix it in, stirring this around till we get it all nicely mixed in. Now that it's nicely mixed in, the next step will be to take some of our traps and put our traps in this boiling mix. Now, it's important to remember that the temperature of the steel of your traps has got to be such that this dye will adhere to it. If it's not hot enough, it isn't going to happen. You won't get your dye staying on the trap, and you will have defeated the purpose for this whole exercise. So we're putting these traps in. You can see they all are badly in need of a treatment. And we're going to let this mix perk along for quite some time now to make sure that your steel is up to the right temperature. Once that steel is at the right temperature and we're satisfied that the dye is set on the steel, it will be then moving it over to the wax and dipping it in the hot wax. Okay, one of the commonly used techniques or devices for blackening your traps, dyeing your traps, is just to take a 45-gallon drum and cut the half of it off and use it as a boiling pan. That then allows you to take a number of traps and do them all at the same time, where you can put them in fluid, drop them down carefully, and do a whole lot of them all at the same time. You boil them for a few minutes, pull them back out again, and you can hang them up as a group as well. The second method of dyeing your traps is using the speed dip. This is a product here, and what you do is you take some of the speed dip, you pour it into the safe container like this, and a can like this will require about 4 liters of naphtha to have the right mix. But remember, you're dealing with naphtha, and naphtha gives off fumes, and this is something certainly you don't want to do in a confined area. Better that you do this outside, better to be safe than sorry. Once we've finished mixing the speed dip and the naphtha, we have to stir it around and make sure that it's ready for the traps. Get that all nicely mixed. Then we simply take our traps, put them in the mix, make sure they're well covered. One here. Here. And there you go. We're all finished. The only thing that remains to be done now is to hang these up in a well-aired area and leave them for maybe a week or two to get rid of all the fumes and any of the residues that may be in the mix. And at that point, they'll be safe, they'll be scentless, they'll be ready to go. Traps look like they're ready now. So at this stage, you have two choices. You can either put some wax in and let it melt and float on top of this dyed water. Pull your trap up through it, and that will properly wax your trap and make it ready. Or alternatively, you can put it separately in a batch of wax and do the same thing. But here what we're going to do is just melt this onto the top of this dyed water and then bring the traps up through it. We're going to just drop that in there. We're going to let that melt now. And when that's melted and covers the water, pull the traps out, as I said, and that will properly seal your traps. Now, no matter which type of dyeing you choose, whether it's the logwood crystal or the speed dip, it's always better to wax your traps at the end of the process. Waxing helps to preserve the trap, adding to its life expectancy. It also seals the treatment on and speeds up the trap. It makes it work much more efficiently. So whenever you can, make sure you get the wax on your traps, whichever method you choose. Alright, now that the wax is melted, the next step of course is to pull them out. To make sure that this trap is properly waxed, you have to carefully pull the trap up through, have a look at it. If it doesn't look quite right, then dip it down in again a little bit. Make sure you've got a good coating of wax on it. There you have it. We'll just lay this back here now and let it dry. Down here. Make sure it's underneath the wax. Good layer of wax. There you go. Properly coated, ready to go. The second method, as I referred to, is rather than putting the wax on top of the logwood crystal, is to simply put them in a separate vat of liquid wax, beeswax or paraffin. Let them set for a while, the wax, until you're satisfied that the wax is properly adhered to the trap, and bring them out. Let them drip off a little bit because you want to save that wax as much as you can. And then lay it aside. It'll be hung up to be dried. And it only takes probably a few minutes for these things to dry when they're just waxed this way. Nicely done. Ready for the fall. You can see here now that we finished some of these traps. You can see the significant difference between the ones that have been treated and the ones that have yet to be treated. There's one final point to remember though, and that's after you've had these traps treated with wax, make sure you check the dogs on each of these traps to make sure that they will take a good bite on the bar. So you may want to take a dull knife or something and scrape that little bit of wax that may build up around the dog teeth to make sure you get a good solid connection when you go to set these traps. Okay, for those of you who are also canid trappers, it's important that you to treat all your equipment in the same way you have the other traps. It's particularly important because canids are very sensitive to scent, and it's very important that we treat these traps so that they're scent free. We take all the equipment that you see here needs to be treated in the wax in the same way that that you've treated your other traps. Once we've had this equipment in here for a bit, we take it out and let the excess wax drip it off. It's important to remember that as this equipment is being treated, it needs to go into a scent-free container to make sure that there's no scent at all. It's one thing to kill a scent in here, but if you turn around and don't treat it properly afterwards, you've wasted all your efforts. Use special gloves that have been scent-free, that are treated scent-free, so that you don't have to worry about transferring that as you handle your equipment after the fact. Get rid of the excess wax, then on to the container. Okay, now that we've treated our traps, the next step is to put these into a scent-free container. It's important to remember that if you've taken the scent from these things in the process, that you keep them that way right through to the time you're going to use them. So we take a couple of the snares and put them into these sacks. We then take a piece of balsam twigs and put it in there, and that helps to add some wood odor to it. It's important to remember that even handling the twigs, that you wear the gloves that are scent-free so that you don't impart any scent from your hand onto the branch itself. You then seal the bag, squeezing out the air as you go, and your bags are ready for the fall. If you're trapping in certain kinds of habitat, it's important to try and match the scent from the habitat with the traps, or with the snares, excuse me. If you're trapping in cedars, then you should probably use a cedar branch rather than a fir branch. But if you're mainly trapping in the fir areas, then that's what you would use. And presumably in field situations, you may want to match it with grasses or weeds from the field areas as well.